All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Revamping College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick will be doing a recap of the haul that the Colorado Buffaloes accomplished in the transfer portal. It's been a big offseason, Nick, for Colorado since attaining Deion Sanders. One thing we knew about primetime is that, it was a big topic that he would undoubtedly recruit a lot of players, whether school he went to, regardless of being, completely on point with the X's and O's or, despite having limited experience as a coach and, as a whole. We knew his services would be, highly sought after. We talked about teams like USF, Georgia Tech, and then ultimately Colorado is where he ended up. I think this was a perfect investment for Colorado. Why not take a stab at it, considering they've been very poor at football for a numerous amount of years. We're going to look at the offense and the defense, but first we're going to look at some players that are partying in the portal. But first, Nick, I do want to get your thoughts on what Colorado's done, now that we've had some time to let the dust settle and Deion's had some time to get to work. 24 current commits in the transfer portal. That's, I think that's actually second to Arizona State, but that's one of the highest numbers you're going to see. He also flipped another number one cornerback in Cormani McLean from Miami. What is your reaction at this moment in time, a couple months into Deion's tenure, with what he's been able to do so far in this offseason?
24 commits is certainly a staggering number out of the transfer portal, right? We knew Deion was going to come into Colorado and revamp his entire program. The goal was to hit the transfer portal hard. A lot of the guys coming from JSU, right, jumping up from Jackson State to the Power 5 FBS level, right? So it's a huge jump from FCS ball. They're sticking with their coach. They're following him to Colorado. There's some big names on this list, right? These are guys he's grabbing talented names from different schools across, the country. A lot of FCS players, but also some solid FBS folks who jump in there. Some SEC players being involved in this as well. Colorado certainly can expect a huge turnaround probably pretty quickly at this point in time. I think Deion is committed to building something very quickly out in Boulder, right? This team is not great, right? They won one game last year, terrible team top to bottom. It's been a bad program for the last 20-odd years or so. And I think Deion is committed to trying to build this program as fast as possible and ultimately probably taking a bigger and better job somewhere else in college football.
And now they didn't just have an amazing haul. They did lose a handful of players here. Not too many are notables, though. I do think the biggest storyline, Deion Sanders, of course, coming over from Jackson State, following his dad. That was expected. But they do lose 4 quarterbacks, Nick. This might be important to lose this much depth. Obviously, this is not a very good, more productive position for the Buffaloes. JT Shrout played most of last year. Brendan Lewis got hurt, who 2 years ago I thought would be a pretty respectable starter, and he was completely awful. This passing attack the last 2 seasons has just been horrendous. Shrout, though, 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns in 2022. 128 passing yards per game, though. That's not a good number one bit. I do think 2 big losses here, though, on the offensive line. Austin Johnson, he played 400-plus snaps a season ago, and then a great pass blocker at guard in Casey Broderick, who's headed to Florida State. So I think the loss of those 2 linemen and then losing 4 quarterbacks, certainly, it's something to monitor, but for the most part, I think Deion's did a good job of keeping this roster intact despite, the talent already being quite low.
Certainly the quarterback position, we'd expect at least 1 or 2 of these guys to leave. 4 is a bit of a staggering number. I didn't think we'd see 4 guys leave. That is a lot when you think about it, considering the depth of the quarterback position. It might be something to keep an eye on. I think Sanders coming in from JSU following his dad, he's a talented quarterback, so I certainly think that's a fine right now. I think, Casey Roderick is a big loss, right? We highlighted him in the Florida State episode we did a few weeks ago. Very talented pass blocker, great fit at Florida State. I think that's a good move for him. Austin Johnson as well, interior offensive line, solid guy, big guy, good numbers, good pass blocking as well, decent against the run. So I think it's tough to lose a piece like that. But I think they've added so much from across college football that they're going to be able to make it up with the losses with the additions very quickly.
Now, looking at some of the offensive additions, this is a team that's been completely awful on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense. Despite having some pretty impressive talent, at least they did 2 years ago, and they were unable to deliver one bit. You're going to notice a theme here in this episode, and that is the commitment to the trenches. And starting here on the offensive side of things, Tyler Brown, Landon Beebe, Jackson State product, and Brown, great pass blocker, playing in the Sun Belt a season ago. From Missouri State, and Beebe wasn't all that great a season ago. Yusuf Moharibil from Florida. He didn't play last year, but coming from the SEC, that might be a good addition there. I think the most underrated addition in the portal is Savion Washington from Kent State. And he was a really good player, much better pass blocker than run blocker, but he was great in all facets for Kent State. One of the biggest additions of this offseason from a coaching standpoint that not a lot of people are talking about is Sean Lewis. He was the head coach at Kent State. He comes over here to coach this offense, Nick. Never do you see a guy leave a head coaching job for offensive coordinator position, any coordinator position for that matter. That's a pretty wild, addition that people are not going to be talking about, because typically that comes with a pretty significant pay cut, regardless of where you're leaving from. But I think, Lewis, he's a really good offensive coach. He sees a vision here that Deion Sanders has, And, looking at the commitment to the trenches, what are your thoughts on some of these linemen they've picked up? And, of course, Lewis coming over. I think that's a pretty big-time addition for Sanders, especially since he's not great from an X's and O's standpoint, but this guy is.
Right, so I think Savion Washington's a huge pickup here for for Colorado coming from Kent State. I love the size. I mean, the size is just impressive, right? 6'8", 340, great on the interior. I think he adds a really big, a huge potential here to kind of work with this and add a big interior guy. And Sean Lewis, of course, leaving a head coaching role to the offensive coordinator is crazy thing to see in college football. He is young at 36, right? He got the job when he was relatively young at Kent State. He was in his early 30s when he took the Kent State job, and wasn't having a bad tenure there. They made a bowl game in 2021. They were above 500 that year. They were above 500 in the COVID year. They made a bowl game in 2019 as well. Guy has good experience in the past at Syracuse and Bowling Green, but to make the move to be a coordinator after being a head coach is a crazy move. I think this is a good fit, though. I think Lewis adds a lot of talent in terms of the X's and O's. I think he's a great coach in that regard. And when I look at Savion Washington, I think he's fantastic in pass block. I've been looking at some of the film, some of the highlights from high school and from college. Really big size, really plugs the holes really nice there. Also, of course, getting Sanders at quarterback, fantastic piece to have. We're going to get touched on that in a second. I think this offensive line, they added the interior. They added some guys from the trenches. Tyler Brown, good player from Jackson State, good experience there. They want to beef up this offensive line. They want to protect their quarterback. I think this is a good way to kind of start building a program. You got to start in the trenches with the offensive line.
They also want to improve a running game that was one of the worst in college football last year. Of course, in 2020, in a COVID-shortened year, Jarrett Broussard was the offensive player of the year in the conference, but only 108 yards per game last year for a backfield I thought had some talent in it. Alex Fott, not Deion Smith. Two reliable running backs, in my opinion, that just were not able to get things going on the ground one bit. That leads you to Cavazier Smoke they picked up from Kentucky. He's been a great number 2 for Kentucky behind Chris Rodriguez the past couple of seasons. Wasn't as effective as Chris was, behind a woeful offensive line this past year. He really struggled when Rodriguez came back. You really seen that offense, kick it up a notch just because that's how good he is. But when he was running behind a poor O-line, Smoke really did nothing. That's certainly a concern here at Colorado. So I do think that they're certainly paying attention to their ground attack because Smoke is a good runner when he's got some help up front. And that's certainly a commitment they have tried to make in this offseason. But looking at the passing game as well, it's not any better through the air. 127th in college football with a 49.7% completion rate last year was Colorado. 173 yards per game. It was worse than that in 2021 at 131 yards per game. That's down there with Army and Air Force, Nick. Those teams only throw the ball about 2 times a game, and they're putting up almost the same yards per contest. Certainly ugly. Shedeur Sanders, a lot of people just know him as Deion's son. A lot of people forget this is a really good quarterback, though. A former 4-star coming out of high school, 40 touchdowns this past year, 3,700 yards, completed almost 71% of his passes. This is a guy that's certainly a very good talent, and coming along with him, Jimmy Horn from USF. The numbers aren't anything special, but this is a very versatile playmaker with speed. They can utilize him in the special teams game as well. That's certainly a guy they're going to get heavily involved this year. And Sadu Traore from Arkansas State, an underrated playmaker from Arkansas State. Nick, this is a guy that certainly was a big part of a team that was not very good last year. I believe he had 40 or 50 receptions. Underrated player there for that football team, the Red Wolves. How do you feel about this passing attack starting to take shape now that we talk about the running game?
I like Jimmy Horn here. I think this is a good add. 3-star coming out of high school, a 3-sport athlete. I like that in a guy who's got versatile creativity, 5'9", 170, good speed on this guy. Like what he can do in the slot. Talented top to bottom. Didn't really work out for him at USF. I mean, USF really isn't the greatest spot to be if you're a wide receiver. Kind of tough to get some good targets there. But he goes to Colorado here. I think this is a good pickup, a good young receiver with some serious talent here. Kind of be able to produce something. Of course, I think Sanders, he's a talented quarterback, right? People want to say, oh, he just followed his dad. He only got there because of his dad. I think a lot of Power 5 teams would have been calling his name regardless, right? So I think he was a popular name in the portal. He follows his dad. That makes a whole lot of sense. He's a great quarterback, good athlete, top to bottom. I like the size of them. The arm strength, pretty good as well. Decision-making, not bad. It's going to be a tough jump from FCS to FBS level, right? Obviously, jumping from where Jackson State is to the Pac-12 is going to got the tool set, the skill set, and the raw talent to do so.
And Traore from Arkansas State did lead his team last year, 50 receptions, 655 yards, 4 touchdowns. All those are team highs from the United Kingdom. Nick, last year this offense had 15.4 points per game. That is just horrendous. What do you think is a realistic expectation for this unit? I'm going to set it at about 28 points per game, 4 touchdowns. I certainly think that is realistic with, some of the additions they've made here to beef up the trenches, a lot better playmaker at quarterback and at running back, and even at wide receiver. Those are 3 impact starters right off the bat. Savion Washington, another highly impactful transfer here for this offense. And, of course, again, Sean Lewis. So what do you think? 28 points, is that achievable, or are you going to set it a little higher or a little lower?
I think it's honestly anywhere between 10 to 15 point improvement. So looking at 25 to 30 points per game improvement. I think that's or per game as a 10 to 15 point improvement there. I think 28, that's right in the middle of what I'm suggesting. So I think it could be anywhere on that higher or lower end of 28. I think 25 would be probably the floor for me, and 30 points per game would be the ceiling for me. I think it's certainly achievable considering the talent they add. I think this team only can go up from here, right? You're not going to get worse than 15 points per game. They're going to improve. It's just going to be how much they improve. I think 10 to 15, that range, if things start to really click, they can start to push maybe, 17, 18, 20 points per game improvement. But I think 10 to 15 is kind of where I'm going to sit, which is kind of right where you're right in the middle there. So I think we kind of have the same opinion on this offense. They're going to improve. We're going to see a lot of change in this offense, a new dynamic, new scheme. It can be a lot of fun to watch this offense develop.
It'll also be pretty exciting to see how they develop as well. But I think the defense, the same goes for them, because they added a lot of talent on this side of the ball. This is a unit that gave up almost 45 points per game last year. That is just horrendous. They had almost nearly, I think it was 185 missed tackles they had. They led college football in that category regardless. They were just terrible, Nick, and I knew they were, because in 2021 they allowed almost 27 points per game, and they had a lot of talent on that unit. They lost all those guys. It's a big reason why I said this team would not win a game last year, and they won one in a defensive slugfest against Cal. This defense was horrible, Nick. They could not help their offense that's also struggled out tremendously. It's a big rebuild job here for Deion Sanders. But looking at what they did, like I said, they put a lot of attention to their trenches. You look at Shane Coates from Dartmouth, 6'3", 275. He's a run stopper, 8.5 tackles for loss last year. Taj Alston from West Virginia. This is a guy that I talked about coming into last season. He was pretty quiet, unfortunately, but the year before that, breakout year, 11 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, a productive guy. He's inconsistent, but his best attribute is, again, stopping the run. 2 guys that added there can certainly help in, slowing things down. Jordan Dominic from Arkansas. This was a bit of a shocker to see him enter the portal, because this guy really impressed this past year. Arkansas, their pass rush as a whole really kind of shocked me. They were 6th in college football. He had 9.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks. Arkansas was 6th in college football in sacks, that is. And both of those numbers were second to Drew Sanders, who was about to be a first or a second round pick in the NFL draft. He had a forced fumble versus Cincinnati, which I believe was a go-ahead touchdown in a one-score game for them. So Dominic is a heck of a playmaker. Wasn't exactly a 3-down player, though, only 316 snaps. Well, he was on the field, Nick. He was electric. And 2 more guys here that I think are certainly going to help them. Taylor Upshaw, I pegged a few guys to be breakout stars for Michigan last year as veterans. Upshaw didn't exactly live up to it. 4 tackles for loss, 11 tackles. He was never on the field for more than 30 snaps in the game. But he's a good depth piece, I think, they can add to the rotation. Then Leonard Payne from Fresno State. A lot of beef here, 6'3", 308. He was also a really good run defender this past year. So this is a big struggle area for him, Nick. And they pick up, a handful of guys here that are going to certainly make an impact immediately.
Yeah, I think this is a good additions for this front seven. I like Shane Coates as well, an underrated guy coming out of Dartmouth.
Yeah, 53 total tackles this season, 3.5
sacks. Big jump up there, but I think he's got good size. I like what he can do, 6'3", 275. Solid player. Upshaw, good guy coming out of Michigan, right? Was coached very solidly there. Taj Alston, expected more of him at West Virginia, but I think he's a really talented player, can really turn around. Jordan Dominic, fantastic player at Arkansas, great in terms of getting sacks, getting after the quarterback, great pressure. Yes, he certainly does get tired, but I think he's a talented player. Vonta Bentley as well from Clemson, a good linebacker. I think they're adding pieces they need to, right? This defense was horrid last year. Like you said, 40 points per game, given up roughly around that. Terrible number. This was a bad defense that just did not have any talent. And they go after the portal, and, Deion Sanders knows what he needs to do. They need to beef up on defense. He brings in a lot of different athletes, a lot of different talent here on defense. He'll start to plug these guys in day one and see what they can do.
And again, like the theme here is they're adding some guys that can help stop the run. And this is a team that ranked dead last in yards per game allowed in college football. They also ranked last with 39 touchdowns allowed on the ground. They were just completely terrible. If you can't stop the run, you're not going to win many games. It's just how it goes in college football, all football that is. And that leads you to some of the linebackers they added, because they're going to need more help than just up front. Jeremiah Brown from Jackson State, who was a starter last season, had a pretty average year. This is where it gets a little exciting, though. You pick up Demoy Kennedy from Alabama, who just committed here a few days ago. 39th overall prospect in the class of 2020. He was the 3rd-ranked linebacker. Only 6 snaps in his Alabama career, which was logged this past year. He's a runner, though, and a finisher with a good lower body. Some nice explosion there. Really didn't put it on display at Alabama, but his scouting report certainly would check out if he can get on the field. Vontae Bentley from Clemson, 163 snaps, 48 tackles in 4 years. He rarely saw the field as well. But being around these defensive minds, he was around Venables for a couple of years. Bentley was. Kennedy around Nick Saban, Pete Golding, those guys. They're certainly going to bring some leadership and discipline that Deion can work with, Nick. So how do you feel about those 3 linebackers? And overall, Well, what do you kind of expect from this front seven that again last year was completely horrid? Now you got some pieces you can work with.
Des Moines Kennedy didn't quite pan out in Tuscaloosa. Really disappointed. He's a prospect that I really liked coming out of high school. Fontez Bentley as well. Talented guy, just really couldn't find his way onto the field at Clemson, surrounded by a lot of the athletes here. He's going to get a great chance to be a leader in this front seven. Expect to take a huge leadership role. I think he's got a really big chance to step up and be that big hard hitter that they need here in Colorado. I think this is a great front seven additions. I think these guys really have a chance here to start day one and start to make some impacts. It's a front seven that could not get after the quarterback, could not get after the running backs at all, and offense just ran all over Colorado. This is a huge chance here to have talented players. They're bringing in, Clemson, Alabama. These are big programs in the national scheme of college football, and these guys get learned from some great defensive minds, like you suggested. I think these guys are going to come in and be leaders day one. Des Moines Kennedy, I expect to see a huge year out of him in the Pac-12.
And looking at some of the improvements in the secondary, Colorado, 113th in college football against the pass, allowed 31 touchdowns, only snagged 6 interceptions, which is one of the lowest numbers in football as well. Just complete horridness around this defense, Nick. There was not much to be impressed about, but I think things are certainly on the uphill. This is where Deion Sanders is expected to thrive, at least in terms of bringing in talent. This was a talented unit. They had Mark Perry, Isaiah Lewis, Christian Gonzalez was about to be a top 15 draft selection. Mekhi Blackman was an elite corner for USC this past year. And back to Perry, he was great for TCU. 3 out of those 4 guys transferred out, Nick. Lewis stuck around, but the other guys, they transferred elsewhere, and they were able to thrive elsewhere. This is a team that certainly has had talent in the back end. They were not able to deliver one bit, though, and I think, it's unfortunate for Buffalo fans to see those guys be as good as they were elsewhere. They still struggled on the back end, all in all. Cameron Simon from GSU, this guy was elite in coverage for them at safety. He had 50 tackles also. Tavion Beasley also comes over from Jackson State. He was good in all facets of his game in limited play. And, of course, the big headliner, Travis Hunter. It was expected for him to follow Deion. He certainly did a good marketing job, though. He was telling people, when I get a certain amount of followers, I'll tell you where I'm going. And to no one's shock, he followed Deion Sanders despite the potential to go to USC or Georgia for probably a lot of money. This guy's an elite athlete. Great year at Jackson State. Made some amazing plays at wide receiver in a bowl game. And, of course, they also picked up Cormani McClain. 2 number 1 corners will be playing next to each other on this defense, Nick. That's certainly very impressive for Deion. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. 2 more guys they added, though. Kendrick Breedlove from Ole Miss, a 3-star athlete coming out of high school in the class of 2021. Never saw the field at Ole Miss, did play on special teams, so maybe that would be his day 1 role. And then Miles Slusher, another Arkansas guy, is a versatile DB. He was expected to break out this past year. Unfortunately, did not. He only played in a few games due to injury, but he's a good box safety. Obviously, some of these names a lot of people don't know of, but I do think this trio from Jackson State to follow him over, these guys are going to have an immediate impact. I'm very interested to see how good this pass defense, can improve, especially when they get USC at home in the first month of the year.
Travis Hunter shocked the world when he decommitted from Florida State and chose Jackson State. Joining Deion Sanders, had a great first year at Jackson State. Now he moves to Colorado with him. This is a great fit. Travis Hunter is an all-around athlete, really talented player, one of the best pure athletes in college football. There's a reason why he was the number 1 recruit in his class, right? Super talented player. Throw him at cornerback. You could probably put him anywhere on the field to be able to make plays. Great cornerback, great reads, good in coverage as well. Fantastic player. Tavion Beasley, I like him. Underrated ad. Had a really solid season at Jackson State. I think people are not talking about him a lot. Miles Slusher, if he can stay healthy, he's a huge potential impact piece. Great as a box safety, like you said. I think he's got a real potential to be a main impact player if he can stay healthy. As long as he keeps his health in order, he'll be a really talented player. I could potentially see him breaking out in Colorado. Kendrick Breedlove, good guy on special teams, right? Get him on defensive special teams. I think he's going to add a real big impact there. Simon as well from Jackson State, another good player. Looked good in the small sample size of film I watched. This secondary is going to obviously improve, right? Deion Sanders, a secondary guy himself in the past. He's going to coach these guys up. He's very excited to have this roster here. Travis Hunter, one of the best players in the nation in terms of pure athletic ability. He's going to have a chance to show his skills in the Power 5 in the Pac-12 and get a chance to build his draft stock, something he's always wanted to work on. He said in the past that he wants to grow his draft stock. He had offers, right?
He sticks with Coach Prime. I love it. I think it's a great
idea to stick with Coach Prime. Kind of stay where you are, stay with what you know, and get the chance to really show yourself, be the star on the field for him. Travis Hunter is making great decisions, in my opinion. And this is a fun secondary that's going to be a lot better than they were last year. They're going to have real chances here. I could see that interception rate go up a lot, right? 6 last year. I could see 12 to 15 this year is a reasonable goal for the secondary to pick up interceptions. It's going to be a fun team to watch on defense for sure, and the secondary is full of stars.
And the guy that's going to be tasked with putting them together is Charles Kelly. Comes over from Alabama, was there since 2019 as an associate defensive coordinator, and he worked with the safeties. He's been working with defensive backs his entire coaching career from the mid-'90s until now. This is a guy who was on staff with Jeremy Pruitt at Florida State when they won a national championship, and he was their defensive play caller for a couple years after that before going to Tennessee. This is another very underrated addition for their coordinator, rotation here, Nick. How do you feel about Charles Kelly? What do you know about him from his days at Alabama? And I think him coaching the secondary mixed with Deion Sanders is also going to be a heck of a coach in the back end. This could be a real strong point for Colorado football, and I think they're certainly going to be able to recruit the best of the best at this position. But how will the rest of the defense fare? Because, again, their biggest weakness is still stopping the run.
Right, I think they're going to be able to recruit a good secondary here. I think Charles Kelly was a great add. Previously a defensive coordinator at Florida State, has good experience across the board, spent the time in Tuscaloosa, obviously the last three or four seasons doing the safety associate defensive coordinator. I think this is a great add for Colorado. He's a really good, leader on the sidelines, good experience, good recruiter as well. I think he's going to be able to help him and Coach Prime together. That's a deadly combo for recruiting, secondary pieces. I do expect the run defense to be a bit more of a project. I think it's going to take a couple seasons to get kind of comfortable into that. I think they're going to have to kind of develop and find their way. I think that we should not expect a huge jump up from the run defense. I think they'll still give up some serious ground game early on. I think it's going to be a long adjustment period, but I think they're getting the right pieces here. And once Deion has a chance to build his
defense will shape up very quickly.
I think they have the right pieces. These transfer portal pieces are certainly going to add up. I think, Kennedy, Bentley, great guys to have. Cokes, Upshaw, fantastic on the front seven. Dominic as well. So I think this team is building a great defense, and they should be able to start hard hitting, getting results on the field, getting a lot of 3-and-outs here, and putting together a great defense.
That's going to be for today's episode, guys. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me. One final question I do have for you is, do you think a bowl game is achievable for this team? Because I think a lot of Colorado fans and even college football fans that like Deion Sanders are very excited to see how this moves together, but people do not really realize how bad this football team was and how poorly constructed the roster was as well. So even though they've gotten some impressive pieces like at the quarterback position and a couple nice linemen on both sides and a guy like Travis Hunter, the roster construction is still poor, and I definitely think wins are going to be hard to find this year.
Yeah, I think, jumping to a bowl game already is kind of a tough ask. You do look at the schedule, right? Out of conference, they travel to TCU. That's going to be a tough game. They host Nebraska, also a first-year head coach. They host Colorado State, rivalry, and then they get into Pac-12 play. They got to travel to Oregon. They got to travel to Washington State. They got to travel to Utah. They got to travel to Arizona State, another team with a huge amount of transfer portal pieces. They got to travel to Utah. 6 wins, kind of tough to find here. I think it's going to be an adjustment period. I think they'll win 4 games this upcoming season. I think 4 to 5 is certainly achievable. But bowl game in the first season seems like a bit of a reach for me, considering there's just so many new faces, and it's a whole kind of setup here. I think you can't build a dominant program overnight. I know Sonny Dykes did, but that's just a rare case. It's going to be tough to do that in Colorado. It's going to take probably 2 years to get to a bowl game, in my opinion.
Sonny Dykes also inherited a team full of seniors. I do think that is important to add. Again, Nick, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sonny Dykes did inherit a team full of seniors. I think, Deion Sanders has a blueprint to follow, right? The transfer portal has opened some doors for him. He's a fantastic name, great recruiter. And as long as he's willing to commit to Colorado for 5 years, this team could be competing in the Pac-12 in potentially 5 years with how much potential talent they can bring in.
Especially with USC and UCLA on their way to the Big Ten. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.